nerderotic.com.
Is George Lucas a secret member of the Fandom Menace? Well, it looks that way because Bob Iger, for some reason, released an autobiography that I think should have been released after he isn't working for Disney anymore. But this shows how arrogant and confident this dipshit is, because what he wrote about the great George Lucas really explains why, in the words of Ichibaka's great blog and future book, Disney Star Wars is dumb. If you like what I do here and you like independent voices here on YouTube, please consider subscribing to the channel. YouTube has recently made a change to the algorithm which favors the major corporations like Disney. So if you can like and share the videos as well, and also do this with your favorite YouTuber, they would appreciate it and I would appreciate it. This episode of Disney Schadenfreude is brought to you by Data Racer on Twitter and Ichibaka on Twitter. I hope you are following both of these guys. They are great. They do fantastic work, and they provide a lot of content for a lot of content creators here on YouTube. And I just wanted to let both of you know that I am grateful. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep battling. And quite frankly, it's fun to do this. And I am amazed that Bob Iger was this honest in his autobiography. I am definitely buying it, and that's probably why. But again, I'm guessing there's some people at Disney who aren't entirely happy about this, and we know for a fact George Lucas isn't entirely happy with Star Wars, and that makes me entirely happy. This is from Ichibaka's Star Wars is dumb. George Lucas is Fandom Menace. That's right. George Lucas thinks Disney Star Wars is dumb too. From this Reddit post, Bob released his book, The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Well, I guess he didn't learn all of his lessons because he still works there, and he released this book. Today and within it, he openly discusses the difficult process of securing the massive acquisition deals of Pixar, Marvel, and of course, Lucasfilm, which of course is the only thing he's done. Buy stuff. But he hasn't created anything original for Disney, and that is going to bite Disney in the ass someday. And that's probably why Bob is writing this book and leaving, knowing that he has destroyed one of the biggest franchises, the biggest franchise of all time, and Marvel is following that path. He does not hold back at all and is very open about conflicts like Feige versus Perlmutter, firing his ex-film studio chief, the inner workings of each deal, and the relevant part for this sub, George Lucas's involvement in The Force Awakens. I am definitely going to buy this book. And for those of you who criticize me for calling Disney Star Wars, why don't you wait and listen to what Bob Iger says about George Lucas's reaction, and then maybe you might understand why I call it that. On George sending his outlines for the sequel trilogy, at some point in the process, George told me that he had completed outlines for 3 new movies. He agreed to send us 3 copies of the outlines, one for me, one for Alan Braverman, and one for Alan Horn, who had just been hired to run our studio. Alan Horn and I read George's outlines and decided we needed to buy them, though we made it clear in the purchase agreement that we would not be contractually obligated to adhere to the plot lines he'd laid out. And that's your first red flag right there. I thought Disney was a perfect place for Star Wars. I thought Kathleen Kennedy was the perfect person for Star Wars. Boy, was I wrong. And I look at the prequels completely differently now. They are masterpieces. They are Shakespeare compared to Disney Star Wars. On George's new role of creative authority, he knew that I was going to stand firm on the question of creative control, but it wasn't an easy thing for him to accept. And so he reluctantly agreed to be available to consult with us at our request. I promised that we would be open to his ideas. What a liar. This was not a hard promise to make. Of course, we would be open to George Lucas's ideas, but like the outlines, we would be under no obligation. And it is clear they had no intention of ever using George's ideas. But remember when Kathleen Kennedy promised that she would respect the fans, and maybe initially they thought they were making something for the fans, but when they hired J.J. Abrams, they were fooled by this snake oil salesman. And I know a lot of criticism goes to Rian Johnson, but I think the most really has to go to Jar Jar. On revealing to George they weren't following his plot outlines. Early on, Kathy brought JJ and Michael Arndt up to Northern California to meet with George at his ranch and talk about their ideas for the film. George immediately got upset as they began to describe the plot, and it dawned on him that we weren't using one of the stories he submitted during the negotiations. Listen, George was clearly frustrated with the original Fandom Menace, who was around during the prequels, and Fandom Menace Phase 2 is something he's probably a part of now, and the tide has turned. And at first, he was probably having a little laugh at us, the fans, for getting frustrated with what Disney was doing, but then he came under the realization that these were his babies, these were his kids. On George seeing The Force Awakens for the first time, just prior to the global release, Kathy screened The Force Awakens for George. He didn't hide his disappointment. There's nothing new, he said. In each of the films in the original trilogy, it was important to him to present new worlds, new stories, new characters, and new technologies. In this one, he said, there weren't enough visuals or technical leaps forward, and I'm sure he was upset that they weren't using a lot of his old characters that I believe and that I reported on he gets residuals for. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't appreciating the pressure we were under to give ardent fans a film that felt quintessentially Star Wars, the birth of Disney Star Wars, which is facsimile Star Wars, which is poser Star Wars. We intentionally created a world that was visually and tonally connected to the earlier films. You created a soft reboot, as I reported in this video right here from my insider, and I haven't heard or seen anything to make me doubt this at all. And it also benefited J.J. Abrams because he did the same thing with Star Trek. He started adding his own things, 25% different, so he can make money off of the merchandise. Unfortunately, it didn't work because nobody bought J.J. Abrams' Star Trek merchandise. To not stray too far from what people loved and expected, except for all the new JJ stuff in there. You know, you didn't want to stray too far from R2-D2, who was under a tarp for the entirety of the first movie, but you have a little beach ball running around. I know Doomcock loves that BB-8. And George was criticizing us for the very thing we were trying to do. Looking back with the perspective of several years and a few more Star Wars films and the Fandom Menace, I believe JJ achieved nothing but copying the original film because he's a hack. I'm sorry, he didn't write that. Achieved the near impossible. Yes, destroying the Star Wars franchise. I'm sorry, he didn't write that either. Creating a perfect bridge between what had been and what was to come. Listen, a lot of us were suckered in many ways about The Force Awakens. I didn't think it was good. A lot of people did. But I would have to say that a lot of us thought that you could have good Star Wars eventually from that movie. It wasn't awful like The Last Jedi. There was a foundation there, but we found out, like I've said before, that it was a foundation built in sand because it is mystery box Jar Jar Abrams behind it all. And don't doubt at all that some of that agenda came from him. You have to look into what his wife does and what he's done in multiple franchises, and he's still doing in multiple franchises. Now, Rian Johnson deserves his criticism as well, and so does Bob Iger. But again, Bob, I thank you for your honesty. Ichibaka wraps it up with a sentiment that I completely agree with. Suddenly, the white slavers comment becomes crystal clear. SJWs will argue that George said The Last Jedi was beautifully made. He did, in an Eddie Haskell sort of way. If you don't know who Eddie Haskell is, he's from a show called Leave It to Beaver, and he's always sarcastic. There are a lot of movies that are badly made that I love, and there are a lot of movies that are just beautifully made that I don't like. George Lucas. If you read my own review on The Force Awakens, you'll see I had much the same reaction. Nothing new, cannibalistic art design, boring stuff. As I went back and forth, I first initially did not like it, then I thought I might like it, then I went back and saw it a third time and realized I hated it. Many had that opinion and were slayed by the legacy media for it, and the access media. Exactly right. So how long before we could expect the legacy and access media to start calling George racist, sexist, and or misogynist? Well, the countdown is on. I'm going to close things out by completely agreeing with my friend Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, who said things started going sideways when Disney Star Wars decided to put a bunch of agenda in the story, which George probably didn't do because he is the creator of Star Wars. So you got your purest form of Star Wars. It might not have been good, it might have been just the prequels revisited, but it would have been better than what Disney brought us because they decided to give us Star Wars with a bunch of agenda. And again, it's no coincidence that J.J. Abrams' wife co-founded the Time's Up movement, and they started putting Time's Up Me Too stuff in Star Wars. I don't know if they were the first major franchise to do it, but they were the ones who paved the way and made it okay for all the other franchises to do it later. Thanks a lot, and again, I put that on the shoulders of the Abrams, not Rian Johnson. He was just a player in this. Kathleen Kennedy has her responsibility too, but thanks for shedding some light again on this, Bob Iger. I look forward to more. I can't wait for the chapter on The Last Jedi, and this came in while I was recording the video, so we will end it with this. I've been so careful since our first conversation not to mislead him in any way, and I didn't think I had now. But I could have handled it better. I should have prepared him for the meeting with JJ and Michael and told him about our conversations, that we felt it was better to go in another direction, like filling it full of agenda. I could have talked through this with him and possibly avoided angering him by not surprising him. Now, in the first meeting with him about the future of Star Wars, George felt betrayed. And while the whole process would never have been easy for him, we had gotten off to an unnecessarily rocky start. You think so? I'm sure we're going to get more down the line. Everybody have a great day. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.
Nerderotic.com. Please subscribe.